haven't been giving much of a shout out to my Patreon. Somebody asked me, are you still getting my Patreon money? And I thought, yes, how discouraging for them to still be paying monthly amounts to encourage my semi-journalistic efforts and not get any acknowledgement that that's still happening or that I'm receiving those payments. So I am. It's going into the Patreon account. Thank you so much for doing it. And thank you for reminding me as well that you are still doing it, so that I can remember that I'm not just doing this for fun. I'm doing this because I owe it to people, literally owe it to people who have supported and encouraged and promoted my work. And that even if I'm a small fish in a big pond, I believe that all fish are required, all fins on deck, because we live in an unusual time. We live in one of those times. There's an apocryphal idea that that there was a Chinese saying. So apparently it's not true. This is not a real Chinese saying, but it's still very interesting. And it says that there's a curse, may you live in interesting times. Now, we are living through interesting times. We've lived through a few years of interesting times, and we know that these times can be exhausting, depleting, but also energizing. Sometimes it can bring people together. So to start with, I'm going to bring up a comment from a journalist who works for Washington Post. His name is Greg Sargent, and he said on August the 26th that something ominous is happening. The fusion of anti-mask hysteria and demonizing of migrants for COVID points to a new politics, a form of ethno-nationalist cruelty and scapegoating for future global problems that we should prepare for right now. And I'm very heartened by Greg writing that, because he's very clearly articulated something I've been trying to communicate for 4 years. And that is, when I heard Trump's methodology during his campaign for presidential election in the first time, I recognized that form of ethno-nationalist cruelty. I recognized that technique of fusing psychological manipulation with politics, fusing exploitation of the most irrational elements of our tribal selves when we start to so strongly identify with one particular group of people, be it white Christian nationalists or just white nationalists, that we find it easier to scapegoat people who don't belong to that tribe, i.e. migrants, undocumented migrants, Mexicans, Jews, trans people, anything, any type of group is capable of being scapegoated by an unprincipled, demagogic, snake oil salesman, ethno-nationalist, such as Trump or Adolf Hitler, or any of the people who have used pseudo-patriotism to inflame a segment of the population into an escalating frenzy of contempt, contrarianism, and outright aggressive hostility towards others. And if not outright violence, then acceptance and embracing of violence at a state level. So with Jewish people, that violence came in the form of violently uprooting Jewish people from their homes and sending them to camps, and either working them to death, putting them in conditions that were conducive to death, starvation, tuberculosis, etc., or just literally putting them into rooms and turning on the Zyklon B gas or whatever it was. And I don't mean to be dismissive of that. I'm just trying to avoid getting too emotional on the topic. As my regular listeners will know, that was the fate that befell my great-grandparents, a fate that effectively befell my grandmother in terms of influencing her for all her life, being orphaned at 16, losing her parents who compelled her to jump from a train, one of those large produce, a cattle goods train that was being used to transport Jewish people to one of the death camps. She was a Polish Jew, as was her family, and she survived the Holocaust, consequently became part of my founding matrilineal lineage and part of my emotional upbringing, meaning I have an ear to the ground for ethno-nationalist frenzy. I'm going to be repeating that term a lot today, I think, because I think it's evocative. A lot of the time I use the term white supremacy or white nationalists, which I also think is evocative. But some days I'm interested in trying to bring as many white people on board as possible and not alienate people by using the term white in a disparaging combination straight up. So welcome on board, people. I'm not trying to say that white people are exclusively the source or fountain of all societal ills or all colonialistic impulses. I'm just trying to say that vigilance is required, and we don't just have to be vigilant at the moment. We've already noticed the ethno-nationalistic frenzy that is not merely violent, it is also self-destructive. We can see the consequences of weaponized contrarianism amongst Trump supporters who probably would have taken the vaccine if Trump had been still in office promoting it, but out of loyalty to Trump and fervent opposition to Biden as a president of the United States, coming up with all of these rationalizations that they adhere to for not taking the vaccine and for opposing vaccination requirements that would increase vaccine efficacy for everybody, and mask requirements that would increase the efficacy of mask wearing for everyone and would substantially reduce disease transmission and would really help get this pandemic under control in a more ongoing way. Perry Pilot says, for your information, I like this new scheduled format. Gives us some prior notification you're on. Thank you so much, Perry Pilot. I will tip my hat to my friend from Florida, Brian, who's been using the scheduled broadcast option with HAPS, and he said it was great and helped increase audience size and was just useful. So I thought, yes, I really do have to make an effort to utilize that that technology of being able to schedule a broadcast. I did think I'd made an error and scheduled it for 3:30 a.m. rather than p.m. But perhaps, well, I don't know, did you get a notification that I was going to be broadcasting at 3:30 p.m. Or 3:30 a.m.? Anyway, Perry Pilot also hopes I'm well. Thank you. I think I am well. I'm enjoying living in America so much. I really like the architecture of the homes where I live in the Boston suburbs, and there's so much variety and interest factor that just driving or walking past those homes it's a delight for the eyes, and it's a delight for somebody who did grow up reading a lot of American or American adjacent literature. So Pollyanna and I know Anne of Green Gables is, Ellen Montgomery is from Canada, Prince Edward Island, but all of these American adjacent and American things have given me some visual ideas of what American homes look like, and then to see it represented in the flesh or in the brick, in the weatherboard reality is a delight and a treat. Okay, so Greg Sargent, I'm trying to click on this, I think. Here we go. The dark future of far-right Trumpist politics is coming into view. I guess he's got to find new ways to make this point, but really it's been coming into view for the last 5 years to people with experience in demagoguery and experience in the nihilistic escalation of these type of forces, that when you trick people, when you whip them into a frenzy over some scapegoated demographic group, the frenzy doesn't de-escalate on its own. It rises to a crescendo until it pops like a boil, covering everybody in pus and death. So Adolf Hitler continued to escalate his persecution of the Jews, because once you construct that narrative of these people are to blame, it's not easy to suddenly back down and say, oh, guess what, that they're not really a threat. I made a mistake. Once Trump has told people there are caravans of people coming across the border, and Trump doesn't work in isolation. Trump is a skilled snake oil salesperson who understands that his colleague is Fox News. And he is a Fox News audience member and an OAN audience member and a Newsmax audience member. He watches those shows and determines what might be most persuasive to that audience or what's working well as an argument, and he adopts it for himself. And he amplifies it and makes that message more potent and makes the people who watch those shows feel validated that they had thrown their lot in with someone who, against all pundit predicted odds, was able to gain office, the highest office in the land. So it's been obviously on a worrying trajectory for a while. And I've been really proud of the United States for managing to marshal its resources together and actually vote Trump out. Even when somebody was running a smear sexual assault campaign against Biden and managed to not say anything while he was vice president for 8 years, but just brought it up just after Super Tuesday, and he became the winning candidate over Bernie Sanders. And also, I'm talking about Tara Reid because she also happened to say that she admires Putin's, I took a screenshot of what she said. There's various blogs and opinion pieces she's written over the years, but she said of Putin that I love Russia with all my heart. President Putin scares the power elite in America because he is a compassionate, caring, visionary leader. His obvious reverence for women, children, and animals, and his ability with sports is intoxicating to American women. So that's a quote from Tara Reid, who tried to help Trump overthrow democracy some more in the 2020 election. And everybody has suffered the consequences of having a self-serving pandemicidal maniac at the helm of the free world, because Trump's influence was not limited to the United States. His perversion of public health and safety messages to serve his own purposes is something that has had contagious influence around the world. So it benefited Trump at a political level to, first of all, falsely characterize China's management of COVID as being fantastic. So he congratulated President Xi and said, yep, and it's not going to reach here. It's only a few cases. It's all going to go away. He at that point was trying to ingratiate himself with the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party in order to obtain their signature on a trade deal that would help him take advantage of media asymmetry to conceal the growing manufacturing recession that was afflicting the manufacturing sector towards the end of 2019, that there were 4 quarters of consecutive contraction in the manufacturing sector. As a consequence of Trump's misbegotten trade war, that was part of his macho posturing. And the American media did not do a fabulous job in explaining to average Americans that Trump was misrepresenting what tariffs are and who pays the costs of tariffs and what they are likely to achieve economically. They let Trump assert a certain reality, and they didn't substantially challenge him on really important economic lies, because they act like their only job is to try and give equal airtime to people from 2 parties making 2 contrary assertions or contentions. And they have been less vigilant about their job of establishing accuracy, establishing facts when one party is significantly departing from truth. So that might be a function of wealthy people owning various media outlets and wealthy people having a lot of control over which political party should be subtly favored, even whilst they are the target of criticism by the right in a lather of confected rage against the left media, the media might be quite a lot more right-wing than we're prepared to admit yet. Or more and more people, hopefully, are noticing that the New York Times does some very contentious things sometimes. So yesterday, the New York Times ran a story about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and they said, Florida's really made a big push to get people vaccinated. So why are they having all these problems? Without mentioning that Ron DeSantis, Republican, Trump-affiliated, presidentially ambitious Ron DeSantis, has sabotaged public health in Florida by the groceries came by creating a lot of creating a lot of political fights in the court system. So opposing cruise ships being able to mandate vaccination status, and opposing mask mandates for schools. So using something that Republicans are supposed to be opposed to, government interference in local level control, and doing it so he can ally himself with oppositional Trump supporters who oppose public health because whether subconsciously or not, they're keen on sabotaging their own health and the community's health and the economy of their state and the economy of their nation in order to create chaos that would allow Trump's popularity to... Is it from where your brother accidentally stood on you? Yeah? Do you think you need a bit of Sally? Daddy knows where the Sally is. You go point him in the kitchen. And I left her. Just Mama. Mummy's doing a broadcast. I got a baby. Oh, look, I've left Fox people up for too long. My apologies. Get a wave high? Do you want a sip of Mummy's water? Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you want to read them a little bit? Because Mummy was very impressed with your reading before. Oh, they say hello, Minnie Dows. They're calling Minnie Dows because you're my daughter. Do you think you look more like Mummy as you get older? We got some reusable straws yesterday.
Because I get longer hair.
Yeah? Mummy's hair isn't that long anymore. Oh, I'm barely doing my broadcast anymore. All right, well, we're still going to be talking about political things. So, and we really don't want to spill water on Mummy's computer either. Let's have a look. The anti-immigrant politics of a certain swathe of Republican politicians and Donald Trump loyalists have taken a particularly virulent and ugly turn of late. And if you look closely, you can catch a glimpse of the future direction that US far-right Trumpist political aspirations might take. This unsettling hint of what to come emerges, unsurprisingly, from the confluence of two big political developments in our politics that aren't linked in any obvious sense. The surge in COVID-19 cases, and the battle over the coming resettlement of Afghan refugees in the United States. Well, it is a little bit predictable, and I did talk about it before in that when Ebola was a concern, there was a surge of support for Republican politicians in red states. So if the state was already leaning Republican, there was likely to be a surge of Republican support, meaning if you were disposed towards blaming maybe you can borrow Mummy's water, but you have to go. You go play with your brother. Why is your face like that, darling?
I got to skip reading.
She did get to skip reading. She read a long time to Daddy and to me.
I read them.
Your requirement for school is to read an hour per day. Oh gosh, this is a bit difficult, isn't it? Well, it's invasion of the kidlets, and they're proud of themselves. I'll just read a little bit more of the Washington Post article till I get my bearing. but yes, I had seen reported before that under threat of Ebola, even though Ebola didn't significantly impact the United States, there was a surge of presumably nationalistic sentiment that fueled a surge of support for Republicans. So Republicans know that they are the type of political party that can gain support when the fires of migrant antagonism are stoked by unprincipled, high-profile people. So Trump was prepared to do that in 2015, just capitalizing on the fairly high baseline level of anti-migrant sentiment in the US, which has been obviously a latent problem always for human nature and the American character over the years, but strengthened with the advent of September 11th, 2001, because of the nature of that attack, that it was perpetrated by people who had gained entrance to some American institutions, who had learned to fly planes at American flight schools. That feeling of betrayal and the fact that the attack was on American soil and so substantial and so shocking, and that the American people themselves in planes and domestic flying aircraft were used as a weapon. All of those things were a shock to the psyche of so many in America. And the fallout of that continues 20 years later. It is not really surprising. People are built of stories that we tell ourselves, stories that we share with each other, and our behavior is a function of what we believe to be true, as well as what we are inclined to do. I'm just looking back and seeing a comment that said about Tara Reid, she had zero credibility. It's like she was a Putin stooge and didn't really hurt Biden, I think. She's still trying to hurt Biden, and she still continues to tag celebrities in her posts and post under every Me Too incident that happens and say, yes, well, Biden should also be investigated. Hint, your story was looked into, your allegations were looked into. You didn't have credibility because you changed your story in your own varying blogs over the years. You said yourself that you weren't afraid that Biden would take you into a room and do anything to you. That was at the stage where you were merely intending to allege sexual harassment against Biden or discrimination against for being pretty. And then you saw your opportunity to evolve that further. She saw her opportunity, and that she could assert that she needed to be believed purely on the strength of the new determination amongst people to reverse the historic injustice of a lot of women being disregarded and a lot of women's stories of sexual harassment or rape being ignored, by then pushing the pendulum far over the other side and against due process by automatically believing any woman who made an allegation. All right, Pumpkin, that's enough for you.
No.
Hop down. Baby girl, you're going to lose a sticker if you don't hop down. Thank you, sweetheart. I'm glad you enjoyed yourself. You can keep drinking Mummy's water and be just there if you want to have company, but you can't just stay there on the screen. Mummy is talking to people. And that's probably making quite a big noise on the microphone. Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, you have to take that away now. Sorry, baby. You can still take it, but you can't. Or you can stay here, but you can't drink that and stay here anymore. Okay. Okay. Lordy. It's just under 2 weeks until the anniversary of 9/11. It will be the 20th anniversary, won't it? And that was one of the determinants. Oh, I said she could have it as long as she didn't drink it with us. Daddy's inviting me to go with him, guys. That's nice. That this is my job. This is I can get another job that's more gainfully employed, and I will try to do so. But this is an important job dear to my heart, and I also owe it to my kind Patreons who have added to my feelings of legitimacy in this pursuit by paying me. money on a monthly basis to continue this sort of service that I provide of talking about these important things. So I'm just continuing to read from the Greg Sargent article a tiny bit that says, meanwhile, with COVID cases on the rise, GOP governors in states seeing the worst outbreaks are escalating efforts to blame this on migrants who, fleeing their own horrors, are attempting to cross our southern border. The right-wing media disinformation apparatus has pushed this message with lockstep unity and unfathomably disgusting vitriol. That's a very important message for urban, suburban, educated, left-leaning people to hear, because we don't watch right-wing media, and that's by choice. We sometimes go on Twitter and look at the output of people who do invest the time and energy in weathering that vitriol and bigotry and fomenting of violence against migrants. And they tell us these people are working themselves into a lather. And psychologically, you could explain it by saying there's a lot of pent-up emotional energy there. They need to really keep stirring the pot so hard because they have to make people forget a lot of facts. They have to give people something to look at instead of looking at what is happening in their states, that Republican voters are disproportionately dying now. Before, there was reporting on the fact that Black Americans and people of color were being disproportionately harmed by the pandemic or by the outcomes of the pandemic. And that was an outcome that I can only say, having spent time reading the output of right-wingers and the far right and the radical right, that's an outcome that would have pleased them, whether they admitted it or not. They were all on board with a pandemic if it was oriented towards ethnically cleansing America and restoring or preserving white demographic dominance at a political and a sociological level, which is an awful thing to say out loud, but I believe it to be true. I believe that they increased their opposition to masks and increased their opposition to social distancing and lockdowns at a time when it was being more strongly reported on that a disproportionate number of Black people were dying and were being harmed by COVID. So now those proportions have likely changed. Leaders in the Black community have worked really hard to reassure people that the vaccinations are okay. And a lot of uninsured people have remained unvaccinated. And someone pointed out to me the mechanism for that is that if you're not part of the health insurance system, your job doesn't offer it, you can't afford it, you're locked out of all of those health insurance considerations. You don't really engage with the medical system. And because you can't engage with the medical system, you often are convinced that you don't need it, and you're suspicious of it, and you're antagonistic towards it. Can't have those grapes? Well, those grapes are terrible and would probably poison me anyway. I choose my other options. They're the best. Sure, it's all I can actually have, but they are much better than what's available to other people. I'm comfortable with being uninsured, and don't shame me. So those people in those circumstances are less likely to trust the medical establishment that says, get a vaccine, trust us. It might have seemed really sudden. It might seem to you that the testing protocols are inadequate. You might be susceptible to a whole bunch of forwarded emails from relatives and passed on from Facebook, etc., that have their origins in Russian disinformation and their origins in far radical left hippie groups that are so predicated on naturalistic fallacies that anything that isn't breast milk is a hostile substance to the human body. And those things have all been quite dangerous for the mentality of uninsured Americans who are already liable for huge hospital bills if their lives are in danger because they're uninsured. But also their alienation from the medical establishment means they're also alienated from the kind of people who could talk to you and tell you to get the vaccination, because your aunt won't your doctor would if you had a doctor, but maybe you don't have a doctor. So that at least helped me feel more compassionate for that subsection of the unvaccinated people without medical insurance. Now, I have very little patience for people who do have health insurance and whose opposition to the vaccine seems to derive from their support for Trump as a white nationalist leader. People whose racism increases their tendency to identify with Trump and take all criticisms of Trump as a personal attack that they have to be defensive against. Perry Pilot says, I can only compare it to the followers of Jim Jones. I find it hard to understand how people can submit their mental faculties and lives so easily to a lie. Well, it doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. People who hand the reins of their intellect over to a snake oil salesman who sells ethno-nationalist rage know that it's, well, they don't know actually. They're not sufficiently self-reflecting to know this, but those of us who watch them can see that it's a very addictive process. And we could know that in our own lives. When Trump was president, there was a lot more political engagement on Twitter because rage can be addicting. Rage can give you a psychological boost that you achieve through moral clarity, that you achieve through identifying with the people doing the criticizing, because it allows you to emotionally order the people in your world. We are here above the people we are condemning, Trump and his followers. So if you can reflect and acknowledge, that gives you an emotional boost, even if it's a costly emotional boost. It can be addictive for many. Those people suck. In contrast, I'm better, even if I'm not comfortable with myself. Maybe I haven't achieved very much, or just I'm dissatisfied about some element of my own life. All those pestering anxieties that we compartmentalize into our emotional basement, those minor irritations fade if we are lit up or consumed with the fervor of disparaging other people and giving order to our emotional and moral universe by judging other people. So that gave a lot of people energy, and Trump was very energizing to the Democratic vote, and he wouldn't have been defeated without it. He won in 2016 because of the degree of democratic voter complacency, that Obama had been in office for 2 terms and people felt that America had evolved past the regressive tendencies of voting for nationalistic white Republicans. Like, no, we vote for Black Democratic candidates now, or female Democratic candidates. People will probably vote for her, so I can choose to not vote for her as a protest vote, she'll still be in power, but she'll also get this message of me as a young, disenfranchised, aggravated, not really disenfranchised, but feeling disenfranchised, aggravated Bernie supporter will vote for Trump or will just fail to vote for Hillary Clinton. And a lot of those Bernie supporters, male and female, were cultivated through Russian manipulation of messages on Facebook, using personality diagnostic criteria available on Facebook that they stole via Cambridge Analytica, and then were able to direct additional attention to people who scored highly on personality characteristics, the dark triad of Machiavellianism and narcissism and sociopathy. So they knew what they were doing, and they worked hard, and they were using secret data from the Republican Party, secret polling data that's only available at great cost, but it was given for free to a Kremlin operative by the name of Konstantin Kilimnik on August the 16th of 2016 in the Havana bar owned by Jared Kushner, in the Trump Tower owned by Donald Trump, from Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, the campaign manager and deputy campaign manager of Donald Trump's election campaign at that point. So yes, Donald Trump had an open political campaign and a shadow political campaign being run with Russian assistance, targeting disaffected, that's the word I was looking for instead of disenfranchised, disaffected Bernie Sanders supporters who are also a bit Trump-like in that their politics was very personality-centric, very centric on a savior narrative, which is a big misunderstanding of American politics, which can't just rely on a single savior. You have three reportedly co-equal branches of government: the judicial branch, the legislative branch, Congress, the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, and the executive branch, the president and the administration. So for those Americans who are susceptible to overinflating the role of the executive branch, they either think that when Obama's in office, they don't need to exert themselves to go and vote in the midterms, or when Hillary Clinton's on the line, they think they've got space to just risk it and maybe let Donald Trump win, because all politicians are corrupt anyway, and they've heard so much slander of Hillary Clinton over the years, and they're so offended that their messiah, cranky grandpa Bernie Sanders, was not in office. And that was identified in Robert Mueller's report as well. The evidence they obtained about Russian activities in the 2015-16 campaigning was that they boosted not only Donald Trump, but also Bernie Sanders online. So I hope that was interesting for people. Let's see if there's anything else I can do. Abbott, I'm going back to the reporting from Greg Sargent. He says Abbott and Sanders are both blaming COVID on migrants. We should see this as propaganda about a joint infestation, COVID and migrants jointly infecting the nation. This idea and anti-mask hysteria add up to much more than the sum of their parts. They declare that COVID-bearing migrants are crossing our border en masse. This has been widely debunked, but the story is what matters: COVID and migrants as a joint infestation. Meanwhile, they have converted their public positions into platforms to speak to the Trump rump, the shriveled national minority who see mask mandates as collectivism run amok. Yes, my feelings really hurt when the anti-mask people continue to refer to public health safety efforts as being reminiscent of Nazi Germany, because my family members are obviously victims of Nazi Germany, and for them to say that vaccine passports or not being allowed to go to a gym or a concert are equivalent or at the same slippery slope that afflicted the Jewish people when they were made to wear yellow stars, had their businesses smashed and their property and belongings destroyed and their lives taken from them by brute force and by the collective might of an industrialized power that sought to gain political advantage in the same way that Trump does, by inflaming their supporters into an irrational level of frenzied hatred and misplaced pseudo-patriotism. So yes, that's really personally difficult for me, and I would like to say a big F you to the anti-vaxxers who continue to think that that's an appropriate analogy to make. And I hope, I don't believe that my personal pain would make a great deal of difference to somebody who's already so lost to reason that they would argue that there's an insilency to be drawn between mask mandates and vaccine passports and Nazi Germany. But I'll still put it out there, because even if you don't persuade or have any rhetorical impact on persuading the extremes, there is always a persuadable middle who is listening quietly to what you say if you speak in the right venue and with the right degree of both passion and dispassionate appraisal. So what's this next page? It's the fomenting of hysterical opposition to local officials, enabling communities to collectively protect themselves, combined with the aggressive redirecting of blame towards migrants instead, that makes this mix so combustible. Why take sensible collective action for the public good when calling for higher walls to keep out the joint infestation carries so much more force? This conflation is everywhere. Right-wing media propagandists are relentlessly combining fear-mongering about vaccines with scapegoating of migrants, positioning nativist, ethno-nationalist cruelty as a kind of higher answer than science and collective action. So that's important there, because I'll put it full screen, because those are important sentences that should resonate with us. They're trying to position demographic cruelty and exclusionary activity as a better answer than science. And he's bringing this up because it is going to likely foreshadow, and already does reflect, what will happen as climate change crises around the world intensify. There are going to be increasing groups of migrants. A lot of the migrants from Latin America, probably to a degree climate migrants, because their crops fail due to changing agricultural conditions, which has the fingerprint of climate change, the fingerprints of climate change all over it. I find that an effective way to talk about climate change right now, because you obviously can't attribute things 100% to climate change, but you can say with 100% certainty that climate change is a significant factor in what's happening. And I know that finding terminological exactitude or accuracy is a better way to resonate with an audience and helps audience buy-in. And that is my goal, because I know when you have a higher degree of political consensus, you can move the world. Yes, you can. You can change things, not permanently. The quest for improvement and the quest for a more perfect union is a perpetual quest. Eternal vigilance is a perpetual reminder, a perpetual exhortation to say, be good, watch out for super cruel, self-serving ethno-nationalists who know how to manipulate the human psyche and will use that ability to market cruelty and pseudo-patriotism for their own advantage and the significant disadvantage of others, not only their targets, not only the Jews, but all of the other millions and millions of people who died in Europe and who died around the world as a consequence of ignoring Hitler's irrational ethno-nationalist energy for so long. It is much easier to Nazi earlier than it is to challenge Nazis later. All right. I hope that was a new book. The End of History posits a future reactionary politics that uses global pandemics to push a Malthusian narrative of the indigenous nation threatened by deleterious outside influences. I wonder who wrote it. It projects the future of global politics at a moment when Western liberal democracy's future no longer seems assured, as the allusion to Francis Fukuyama's famous and misrepresented thesis suggests. Well, I don't know anything about Francis Fukuyama's famous and misrepresented, but they posit various authors, co-authors, Alex Hochuli, George Hoare, and Philip Cunliffe, posit a future authoritarian populism fusing a longing for strongman leaders with a Malthusian narrative. This narrative sees pressing global challenges as an opening to build up a zero-sum ideology that emphasizes limited resources and a need to reduce surplus populations by removing outsiders and other elements that corrupts the indigenous population. Well, they're using indigenous there, but it often does mean white, doesn't it? It often means white people who are scared that if they are compelled to share with other people, that everything will go to hell in a handbasket. And you have to say there are limiting principles to sharing. Sure, unlimited sharing might be untenable, but sharing within limits is actually a productive outcome. And espousing the principles of multi-plural, respectful democracies is a way forward that always has better outcomes for the safety of a population, rather than chasing ethno-nationalist populists down the rabbit hole of frenzied hatred and frenzied contempt and suspicion of other other groups who aren't authentically nationalist, who don't belong to the nation. So that's me. I've been talking for 44 minutes now, so that's probably an adequate time to present. Let me bring up my list of Patreons so I can thank everybody who does still contribute, to say thank you and show my appreciation for that, and say, yes, if it weren't for you, it probably would be quite difficult to still be on the air. I have 15 Patreons. And how do I see who they are? Probably there was Bernadette, Zinte, Joy Christine, John Hickey, Sheldon, Jeff, and Clark Elliott. Oh, I shouldn't say people's whole names. Should I say people's full names? Clark and Mark A. Powell and Drew Lewis. Very cool. Christopher Lucas, Elizabeth Hanson, Molly, and Mark. So that's, oh, and Tony Sims. So that's really great. Thank you to everybody who did that. Just super. I was just reading the list. I should look at it more often. Oh, and Alexandra from the Rainbow League. So thank you to all of those people who were patrons at some point. Perry Pilot says, thank you for the broadcast. Your video and audio were pretty good. That's so good because I have had a lot of intermittent success with Wi-Fi viability, and over the last few months while we've been moving around. So now the internet setup here seems to be pretty good. And that's excellent news. Take care, everybody. I hope to talk to you again soon. Oh, I hope to have a guest. His name is his name Craig? I can find it out. But he's just a person on Twitter. Jeff. His name is Jeff. And he said something. Oops, I mistakenly sent him a post that I didn't mean to send. Okay. He wrote in response to a professor who is a professor of pediatrics and molecular virology and the Texas Children's Chair in Tropical Pediatrics. And he put up the story about an anti-masker, Caleb Wallace, who died after organizing various anti-mask rallies. And the professor wrote, "My Texas brother, I can't help but think if I had the opportunity to sit with him and his family, I might have explained he was being targeted by groups only interested in hanging on to power here in Texas, and that they don't care about him or his family. He has 3 little girls and his wife's pregnant with a 4th child." Someone else replied, "I admire your optimism, but I highly doubt that you could have made a difference. This is ideology tied to identity. Changing it is as difficult as changing someone's religion or political orientation." And my friend, my casual acquaintance on Twitter, Jeff, wrote, "While the professor is making a profound difference, I also can't help but think that most people are reachable. Not all, but most. It's hard to imagine otherwise. In business..." What's spilled, darling? Water spilled. Okay.
On the chair.
"In business, the biggest skeptics become the best champions. Don't mistake intensity for intractability." So that's my inspiring part of the broadcast today. Let's not mistake intensity for intractability, and let's still aspire to motivate. Yeah, did you want to get a towel, darling? There's a tea towel in the kitchen. Or a bit of paper towel also. Did you spill it on you or on the floor? Floor, okay.
And my pants.
And your pants?
And my skirt.
And your skirt. Okay.
But not my...
Not your t-shirt? That's good. Why don't you go get your different pants on? Remember how you wanted to get them on before? Different leggings. I was just saying goodbye anyway. So goodbye, everybody. Take care and talk soon.